So let's take a deep breath in. And let it out. Do you know that you came to transform in this very moment? That's what you came to do this morning, to open yourself to receive. And so I know that each one of us is going to hear exactly what we need to hear, see exactly what we need to see, feel exactly what we need to feel, because we are in the divine right place. Is that not right? A few of you think that. Is that not right? Yes. And so I want to start with a quote from Ernest Holmes, because I'm talking about the power of consciousness this morning. And Ernest has this to say: one of the great difficulties in the new order of thought is that we are likely to indulge in too much theory and too little practice. He goes on to say, as a matter of fact, we only know as much as we can prove by actual demonstration. Isn't that the truth? And that when we think we know, I have been guilty of this, maybe you have too, when I think I know and I'm great at spouting platitudes, and then I get to understand what I know when I fully demonstrate. Does that make sense? I get to know what I know at an even deeper level because I am now demonstrating it in my life. I'm demonstrating abundance, prosperity, great relationships. And I have been guilty, just like all of us, of thinking I know something and then I get to prove it. This story happened a long time ago in my life. I was in my late teens, and my brother and I were sitting in our kitchen having a discussion. My brother had recently gotten saved. He had joined a Christian church. My family never went to church, which is why I sought out churches. I went to everything from a Buddhist temple to Lutheran, Catholic. I went everywhere. I wanted to discover God. But my brother had just been saved, and he proceeded to tell me on the kitchen table that morning that I was going to hell because I wasn't saved. I let him chatter on a little bit, and then I realized I don't really care to hear this. And what I found was, as I looked back later, I became intolerant of his intolerance. I became intolerant of his intolerance. And in doing so, I othered him. Do you know what I mean by that? I allowed him to become something outside of me. I did not see him as my brother anymore, and I'm talking about in the spiritual sense. And I've always tried my entire life to practice the oneness that I know is what we teach. And here I found myself othering someone. That was a wonderful lesson for me to get at a very young age, because I wasn't proving what I knew. I was going to a whole different place that was in the dichotomy of what I was doing. I was believing in the multiplicity of the world, and we incarnate into this world in a world of multiplicity, and yet our challenge is to know the oneness in the midst of that, right? And so we get to practice this again and again and again. Do we really know these principles? That's my challenge this morning, to myself mostly. Do I really know these principles? Do I really understand and practice them? Or am I simply a loud and clanging gong, as scriptures say? I would hope that it is the former, not the latter. This is a scene from one of my favorite movies. It's Audrey Hepburn in The Nun Story. And it talks about her growth in becoming a nun. But one of the pivotal scenes in the beginning of the movie is when she goes into the convent, and her father escorts her there, and she's about to go into the convent and be there in training for many years. And so as they're sitting in this waiting room about to go into the convent, the father looks up and he sees a woman walk in, an older woman that is in her nun's outfit, he says, oh, that's Mother Superior. And he says to Audrey Hepburn, he says, she is what's known as a living rule. And Audrey says, well, what's that? And he said, if this church burned down, if all of the texts, the scriptures, everything was demolished today, a living rule means that all someone would have to do is watch them and observe how they live their life to see the principles of this teaching. And I've remembered that. It's like, am I a living rule of religious science? Am I a living rule that if this church, God forbid, burned down, if every church burned down, if every textbook burned, if everything was demolished tomorrow, could someone look at me and say, oh, that's what a religious scientist does. That's how a religious scientist lives and moves and has her being. That's what I want to be, where I not only say what I know to be true for myself, but I live it. And I honor that process again and again and again. Isn't this the hardest thing we get to do in this life? Is prove these principles again and again and again. And like Dr. Holmes said, we get to practice it again until we fully, deeply know this to the core of our being, that nothing, no thing can knock us off center. That's where I want to live. That's where I want to live. Could I be a living rule? Or is someone going to watch me going down the street, and as soon as someone cuts me off on I-40, I, do something not nice? Guilty of that. I want to know that I know what I know, and then I keep practicing it again and again. See, the power of consciousness is that not only we believe what we believe, but we live what we believe, right? We live what we believe. And nowhere is this harder than in relationship. If you want to know how spiritual you are, go spend some time with your family of origin. You get to rediscover what your beliefs are. And even with spouses, right? Even people that are very close and loving, and even we have our moments with our spouse. And yet this is the time where we get to really honor what this is. Raymond Charles Barker, who was the wonderful, where's David? I saw David here. Where is he? I saw him here early. Oh, there he is. You studied under Raymond Charles Barker, is that correct? Yes. A legend in New Thought, had a church in New York City. He wrote a book called How to Change Other People. Now, when people bought that book, they were disappointed because they found out they had to work on themselves. Because can I change anyone else? Of course not. This is my lane. This is their lane. I get to stay in my lane. And so even as I live these principles, I do it from I don't have it in me to tell someone else, I'm sorry, that's not like my brother was. You're not living life right. No. I get to stay in my lane, work on my spirit. And the beauty of this is that as I do that, guess what? Others around me start to magically either disappear or change. There's a process called entrainment. And scientists discovered that when they put metronomes, metronomes that musicians use, and they go back and forth and they set the beat, they found that when they put metronomes in a near vicinity of each other, that eventually they would, even if they started differently, they eventually would be the same. They found that when individuals come together, guess what? My vibration starts to impact other vibrations around me. So entrainment means that if I am upholding my beliefs and my spiritual philosophy and living to the highest best, which means to me, I'm showing up as love. I'm showing up as kindness and compassion, even when it's not given back to me. That's how I decide to show up. And that eventually, if that's what I'm putting out there, entrainment starts to happen. Because if I react in an unkind or unloving way, does that help? No. All I'm doing is setting off a very vicious cycle. And what's that wonderful book by Terry Cole Whitaker? What you think of me is none of my business. Because I don't have to worry about what others are thinking. I just get to worry about me. I get to move from this place of my deep knowing, fully rooted in my own principled beingness. That's where I get to operate from. This is so much easier to talk about than to live. Would you agree? So much easier to say than to be. But we see this even in nature. We see nature showing us this again and again. The spirit of cooperation, the spirit of moving in a place of helping. Scientists also discovered, we live in the South, right? You've seen fire ants? When there's a flood or something, there's a clump of ants because they have figured out that fire ants actually originate in South America. And so when torrential rains in the rainforest would come and force the fire ants out of their nest, they learned that if they immediately connect, the scientists took a beaker and they put thousands of ants in this beaker. They swirled it around till the ants were in a ball, and then they poured the ball of ants on water. And what they discovered was that within 3 minutes of the ball going onto the water, the ants started spreading out. One ant will drown, but when they interlock their legs, they float like a living raft. And so the ants figured out, okay, it's not every man for himself, it's how are we going to rise above this? And they literally link legs, and then they take turns who's on the bottom. And this is a living, breathing, they take all their food out of their hive, their queen, and everything, and they protect it. And when we see nature doing this, understanding the concept that we are all one, we see that again and again. We know that we too can embody that that's part of what we're here to do as well. I want to tell you the story of a woman named Rachel Chapman. In 2010, Rachel was on the eve of her wedding, and they threw a bachelorette party for her friends, her wedding party and her friends, threw a bachelorette party. They were at a friend's house that had a pool in the backyard. And just in a moment of silliness, one of her friends pushed her into the pool. It happened to be the shallow end, and as she fell into the pool, her head hit the bottom of the pool, and she was paralyzed from the neck down on the eve of her wedding. She ended up marrying the man of her dreams still. They married, not the next day, but they married later on. They found a surrogate to have their child. They're 10 years later, they're doing extremely well. But the point I want to make about this story is this, that she went on and she forgave the woman that did that. She was on multiple, numerous media sources as she told her story. The Today Show and other media sources had her on. And the Oprah producers approached her and said, "We want you to come and tell your story on Oprah's show. But the only way that we want you to do it is if you bring the woman who pushed you and share, be the two of you seated there and talk about this." And she said, "Thank you, no. I've never named the woman who pushed me in, and I never will, to protect her identity." That says a lot to turn down Oprah, because she said, the principle that I'm honoring here is that I have truly forgiven. There's nothing to talk about who it actually was. It says a lot about her. So her child now is 5-6 years old, and she's having a fantastic life. But do you think that perhaps forgiveness might have been a key in her successful living today? I think so. That when we come from that place that I am here to love despite what is happening to me, through me, from whatever way it's coming, we know that life is still always supporting us even when it doesn't look like it. We get to know that and still practice our principles again and again and again. Colin Tipping wrote a wonderful book called Radical Forgiveness. And in that book, he is very clear. Don't name somebody as a villain in your life. And don't take on victimhood. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to know that this is a continuing saga of your soul. And he says, know that the people in the story, because don't we make up stories? Oh, we're real good at that. Are living out their part in the divine plan. Do not see anyone as a victim and refuse to label anyone as a villain. People are just acting in dramas being played out so healing can occur. And just like we know that Rachel blessed whatever happened with her and the woman that pushed her in the pool, not maliciously, but it changed her life, didn't it? And it allowed her to know that healing is still going to be happening no matter what. When we openly embrace all that life is giving us, because life is always supporting us, even when it doesn't appear to be so. Every person in this room knows that feeling, don't you? I don't know what's going on right now, but I have to know with every fiber of my being that life is always supporting me and moving me to a higher level of consciousness. And that the people in my world are helping me to get to that place, even when it appears unloving and unkind. Especially when it appears unloving and unkind. I get to practice what I know. Thank you. Thank you. Our new spiritual leader in CSL is Reverend Edward Viljoen. He wrote a wonderful gem of a book called Ordinary Goodness. And he talks about what it takes to have that fortitude to stand and be strong in this. He says, being kind consistently takes strength and courage. Some think kindness is a sign of weakness, and that a person must be blunt and forceful if they want to be strong. To me, real strength is the ability not to retaliate and not to attack when provoked. When I am at the mercy of my reactions, I am weak, because almost anything can set me off. And when I consistently allow myself to return unkindness for unkindness, I don't become stronger. I become more and more a slave of other people's unkindness. That's the truth. I don't want to be a reactionary version of someone's unskilled behavior. I want to know that I am always coming from that place of love, even when it is not offered to me. That's not being weak. And I'm not talking about being a doormat and taking up with abusive behavior. I'm talking about taking your stand and saying, I'm going to be loving despite, and because of. And just for the record, I don't believe in brutal honesty. Have you heard that phrase? I don't believe in that. There's a way to be honest without being brutal. We can deliver everything with kindness, can't we? Everything with kindness. Ralph Waldo Emerson takes it even higher, because too many times I found myself in that place of coming from my human ego and wanting to really react to what is being done. But Emerson brings us back. He says, let us take our bloated nothingness out of the path of our divine circuits. Our bloated nothingness. Been there, have you? Lived there for far too long. And yet I know when I get back to my divine circuits that were pre-installed in me, they're already there. As Dr. Barbara was sharing, you're already there. Just you might have to let go of some things that you've taken on that are covering that up. And so I love how we can move from a place of total reaction to I'm here to love. I'm here to love. Ernest Holmes, we cannot afford to hold personal animosities or enmities against the world or individual members of society. All such thoughts are outside the law and cannot be taken into the heavenly consciousness. Love alone can beget love. Love alone. I can't match unskilled behavior with anything but love. And that's what I choose to call it when someone shows up and they're not very kind. They're just not very skilled, that's all. That takes the personality out of it. It takes my ego out of it too. I'm going to close with a story that you've all heard. It beautifully demonstrates how much we get to practice and how practice does make perfect practice. In 2006, in Nickel Mines, Pennsylvania, in an Amish community, a gunman took 25 students and teachers hostage. He ordered the boys and the teachers to leave, and there were only the girls left. The oldest was 13 years old. And he said, I'm going to shoot every single one of you because my daughter was taken from me. The 13-year-old pleaded with the gunman and said, please, let the younger ones go. Just hold me. Just take me. And he said no. And he proceeded to shoot all of them. 6 of them died. The rest were wounded, some critically. And then he killed himself. What happened next, though, was what really stunned the world. Because within hours of that happening, the grieving families of these daughters that had been killed or wounded came together and offered forgiveness to the family of the young man that had killed himself. They immediately set up a fund to help bury him. And when they had the funeral, of the 75 people that attended, more than half were Amish. This community showed up to not only grieve and bury their own, but to offer solace and comfort and compassion to the family, the widow, and the small children of this man who did the unthinkable. One observer said, every religion talks about forgiveness. The Amish practice it. They live this. And they didn't get to this just overnight. Well, let's make this look good. They do it on a regular basis. If someone has harmed them, that's their practice then to move into a place of forgiveness immediately. And then they really got to do it when their children, I think one of the greatest tragedies a parent can face is losing a child, to have to suffer that and then still practice your belief so deeply that you show up for someone else in your own grief. There's nothing more powerful than an individual standing and living from their point of belief. And so, can you be a living rule this week? Can you remind yourself, I'm here to stand for love and kindness? Can I be that which I profess to be? Can I own that I, in this moment, will do my very best to show up as kindness, to show up as a religious scientist, knowing the truth of who I am and everyone else, because as I give myself the power to be that which I am, I know that I empower the world as well. I know that this week we can show up in a wonderful new way for ourselves and for each other. Namaste.